Hello, everybody. Back in class for Monday. Um, Hope you had a good weekend. I felt like we had some of the nicest weather so far in the spring. A lot of people are outside, and I could tell. My whole neighborhood's abuzz with people doing yard work and house projects. My neighbor next door built a roof for his barbecue, like it goes over where his grill is, and then he built some corn toss boards. Finally did it, I guess. 6-inch diameter holes. Good job. So I hope you guys are doing well. I haven't heard anything bad. Um, I get this fear that if something bad was happening, I wouldn't hear about it. But I've heard good things. You guys are turning in your quizzes and staying in touch that way, so I appreciate it. Um, Class this week is on seasonality in cuisine and like how what crops are available when determines a lot of what we think of as um, well integrated cuisine, or certain dishes, like famous dishes, have to do with what comes in when. I'm thinking strawberry rhubarb pie. The strawberries and the rhubarb are there. Strawberries are too sweet to make a pie with. Rhubarb's a little too tart. Put them together, you get the best thing ever. So let's check this out. Starting with some quotes from Toni Morrison. She's a writer. She died, I think, last winter, actually. She's one of my favorites. Um, Here in the first quote, she's kind of like in a Buddhist mode, I feel like, when she says, "At some point in life, the world's beauty becomes enough. You don't need to photograph, paint, or even remember it. It is enough. No record of it needs to be kept, and you don't need someone to share it with or tell it to. When that happens, that letting go, you let go because you can." And I think she means um, because you can means you have the power to. Like you've learned enough. Your like Jedi training's complete, and you can see that beauty can exist and just be, without having to contain it or tell everyone that that you found it or figured it out. This isn't necessarily a critique of Instagram culture or whatever, but something to keep in mind if you feel like you're having a hard time keeping up with making your life look perfect. In the second one, I wish I could tell you. Well, I am telling you this. I'm sharing this with you. But she tells her students, when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game. I love that last line. Um, Life might not always feel like a grab bag candy game anyway, but um, it's not random how things come down to us. We learn, and through discipline, we um, learn to take care of ourselves. And when we have some extra, when we get to the point where there's some extra time or some extra money or some extra resources, it's kind of our goal and duty to share with others. And that becomes a reflection of our power and our strength. I really appreciate that one. Okay, here's the heading for everything: seasonality and repercussions for meal planning. Repercussions just means how seasonality reverberates through cuisine or has an impact on cuisine. And some of the vocab terms for today are anti-herbivory. So these are like chemicals in plants that um, evolved to prevent animals from eating them or eating too much of them. There's a lot of toxic plants, and there's plants that we eat that have toxins in them, but not so much that we can't eat them. Or we've learned that through cooking them or curing them, for example, we can reduce those toxins. There's fat and water soluble. We're going to use that in reference to like nutrients and vitamins. Some some vitamins are soluble in fat, like vitamin E, for example. Some are soluble in water, like vitamin C, and that determines how often you need them and if you can get them seasonally or not. And then seasonality versus seasoning. So seasonality is like pertaining to the seasons or when something's available. Seasoning is just you know you add spices and herbs and stuff to things. I'm sure you know this, but they're pretty close words. I'm not sure why seasoning is called seasoning. Maybe it is just like adding a little bit of the peak of the moment to your thing. Like if you're seasoning with basil or something, it means it's in season. I don't know. Does anyone else have an idea about that one? Moving on. Humans as organisms are generalists, which means we sort of eat a lot of different things. We live on all continents in the globe now. Even in Antarctica, there's permanent settlements. There's no food in Antarctica, although I take that back. There is food in Antarctica. It's like penguins and seals and stuff. So humans, one of our eating strategies is we eat everything, almost everything. Omnivores mean we eat all categories of foods, like we eat animals, we eat plants, and whatever in between. And opportunists too. I think humans in our evolutionary past were probably scavengers, or at least did a good deal of scavenging. Before we had good tools and stuff, there were much better hunters in the savannas of Africa. And I'm sure more than one human group or even culture lived off of the kills of others. I still live with people that eat roadkill, not because they want to, but well, if it's fresh, they do want to. They're kind of like saving it. But it's a form of opportunism, which means just taking advantage of opportunities. So this generalist omnivore approach is good because it reduces some of the problems with monodiets. A famous monodiet organism is the koala bear, and they just live in eucalyptus trees, and that's all they eat. So if the eucalyptus trees dies, so does the koala bear. Or if they fall out of the tree, they can't like feed on carrots or something until they get back up there. You know what I mean? So and one of the problems with being a koala bear too is that the eucalyptus tree is so toxic to most other things that the koala bear uses some very specialized forms of digestion to get through that toxic exposure, which makes them kind of slow, and they're almost like sloths. So when you think about overeating corn or soybeans, think about, well, we're built to eat a bunch of different things. If we're only eating a few things, we might see some problems because of that. Seasonality restores fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, that has to do with, like in the spring, there's a lot of vitamin A and vitamin E available, and we could build those back up in our fats and store them for times when there's not as much of that. Seasonality also breaks up parasite cycles. When we have periods of the year where we starve or eat something different than other times of the year, that does help to dislodge intestinal parasites or starve them out, or breaks up their cycles so that they can't post up and be there all the time and make us sicker. We'll talk about these things more, but this is kind of the idea with humans as eating a wide variety of things. We gain some advantages by that, and not just that we could live everywhere, but the diversity itself has a value. This is where we live. What our zone is generally called is North Temperate. Check it out. It is a huge part of the globe. A good deal of the landmass of the Earth is in the North Temperate Zone. See, it's all this green, all this green. Here we are up here. Europeans emigrated from the North Temperate Zone. Most of Asia is in the same zone. So those plants that grow there can often grow here. A lot of the people that do well over here do well over here, etc. There are some southern temperate zones, but they're much more rare just because there's less land in that latitude in the southern hemisphere. Of course, these other zones, this is dry savanna, tropical, equatorial. This is, the pink is like tundra or frozen icy land. So in the winter, in the North Temperate zones, we eat root crops that are stored. Meats are a good winter food because they are stored in some sense by drying and hanging and freezing. Some greens hang on in the garden, kale, for example, can be eaten this year. We could have eaten it all of winter because it never really got super duper cold. Chicories are like radicchios and frisee and endives. Those are very cold hardy greens, and often they're eaten in the winter. Like we did in class before the break out, we can make sprouts in the kitchen, and that's something you do year round as long as you have a warm place. The hoop houses, I don't know if you remember being out there, but spinach and mustard greens kind of stand all winter in the hoop houses, and we see how those do well. And also fermented foods like krauts, kimchis, fermented root crops. Those are storable without refrigeration. So these are all kind of pre-refrigeration, pre-freezer technologies, but they still come down to us today as elements of cuisine that we like and we crave in the winter. And these are the kind of foods that would show up in winter menus. I'm going to stop at spring cuisine because this is where we're at. So I want to remind you that the new growth of greens is very nutritious, and our bodies need a lot of what those things have. Winter's hard on our fat-soluble vitamin stores like vitamin A and E. Vitamin C is in short supply if we don't have fresh fruit, which most of us do. But in like medieval Europe, there wasn't oranges really. Not until the trading routes were opened up and we could get tropical fruit. So people relied on these green greens to restore a lot of their essential nutrients and vitamins from eating, winter root crops all the time, or bread or meat, and not very many vegetables. We'll see, if we were at the garden, we could see like our new crop of garlic coming up, which are in the onion family. A lot of onions that didn't get picked in the garden the year before will start sprouting and make green onions. Leeks can overwinter. These are all alliums. Radishes, we could have sowed radishes 3 weeks ago. In the next week or two, we'd be seeing some radishes that we can eat out of the garden even. Turnips are a little later, but we'd be eating turnips by the 1st of May too. Asparagus starts coming out this time of year, or in this part of the country, closer to May. Last week of April is when we start looking for asparagus. Spring mushrooms, I want to make sure that you know that morels are like the famous mushroom in the upper Midwest, and they come out in the next 3 weeks, I'd say. So if you have any hunting grounds, check those out. And of course, our Easter egg hunt, when the chickens start to get warmed up and have access to grass outside again, they start laying eggs in good supply. And the Easter egg hunt is definitely related to farms or small gardens having literally to hunt where the chickens are laying their eggs. We did an Easter egg hunt this weekend. So I had my son, and we were just hunting for eggs that we made and colored. But on the farm, you have to hunt for where the chickens are laying them, which becomes kind of fun, and it's a cool way to use kids' natural curiosity. I'm just going to watch briefly a minute of this with you. You could spring nettles
to find
are the famous spring thing,
and ripe. And
this shows you some of what that looks like. This is like 18th century cooking with this guy. This is nettles. You see, if you've seen nettles, you know them. These have little spines that have formic acid in them that really do feel kind of like a bee sting, and they hurt, and they're there and designed to prevent eating. They're an anti-herbivory thing, but if we pick them carefully and steam them, we can eat them. So he's showing.
It's springtime. It's time
Let Tim
to
talk.
pick stinging nettles so you can make nettle soup.
If your hands are calloused, you could do it without gloves, or you could pick them
Stinging
below
nettles
the
hold a very
soil
special
level.
place in 18th century food and medicine. Medical books from the time period mention these stinging nettles as good for stopping hemorrhages and promoting urine flow.
I'm going to run out of time, but you should watch the rest of the video because it has some answers to the quiz questions. So take care. Bye.